So, guys, today, welcome to this testimonial. So, today I'm with David, and he's with us today, wanting to kind of share some of the wins. David, thank you for joining us. So, let's kind of talk about your situation and where you had been past, present, and future, and how the Divorce Stoppers program, as you transition through that, how that might be a little bit different from, because I know that you're one of many that tried some other things out there that gave you some wins, and one program didn't, and then another program kind of helped a little bit, but it still wasn't what you needed, and you were headed in the direction your wife was telling you. I think that she was out, wanted a divorce. There was no hope. Let's talk about business, but keep it that way, because I'm interested in somebody else at this point. I don't see that it can be saved, and from what I remember, maybe somebody else told you it shouldn't be saved. I don't know. So, David, start out talking about like a little bit about your situation and where you went from, like trying to work on your marriage, what worked and what didn't, and how the Divorce Stoppers program was different maybe for you in a way that you got results from the program. So what was the story with you and your wife and your family?
Well, thank you, Denver. Well, first of all, one thing that I had to realize over the years is I was just fundamentally not very happy in my marriage. I found myself being unfulfilled. It didn't feel like we were really communicating on the level. And I was really putting a lot of that on her. And so one thing I want to really impress upon people is how important it is to find yourself and find where you're accountable in the situation. Through this process, I realized that although for me, it was just a bunch of projection I noticed that she was falling short on so many things. Really in the end, a lot of it was just myself. And a lot of this whole process was learning myself how to fundamentally change as a person and how to change how I spoke to her and what I was putting out to her. So a little bit about what happened. So we had been really unhappy for about 2 years. And as I had mentioned before, a lot of that was really what I was projecting onto her. Obviously, a marriage is a two-way street. So whenever I started, detecting things weren't just quite jiving right, I started pushing for change. Of course, obviously, people don't want to be told that they're wrong, and so
women don't want to be told they're wrong.
Right. Well, and so obviously, explain to her what she can do better. Probably not the best route, but you just don't really realize that at first. So this whole process went on about 2 years, and so I thought, being responsible. This is my second marriage. I really want to make sure that I do it right this time. I don't want to be back out there in the marketplace. We have kids together. And so I decided, like anybody else, let's go to the marriage counselor route. Well, I went to this traditional marriage counselor, PhD, very smart lady. But, I basically dumped an entire college degree into this person. And we started talking. We did this for about a year. And then
what do you mean you dumped a college degree into it? Like the information you gave, or?
No. A college degree worth of paying. This lady, her certifications did not come cheap, and so it's
money. I see. Okay,
absolutely, incredibly expensive, incredible large time dump, and of course, doing this traditional route that she does, she basically came to the conclusion as we started talking and doing all these traditional classic exercises. That there was some fundamental compatibility issues. So what I was going there for was to fix my marriage and to save it. And what she was really trying to do is assess how compatible we were. And so unfortunately, her prognosis was that we probably needed to start taking some time apart, which of course was the opposite of what I was trying to do. And so it really felt like it actually almost drove a wedge in between the process between what I was trying to get my wife and I back to the same place.
So let me ask you a question. You were a client. You hired this doctor as a psychologist or counselor to help you mend your marriage, and her prognosis analysis of that situation. So you're the client. So you're the boss. And
supposedly,
you hired this lady to give you skills to mend your marriage, and she actually is recommending separation or divorce?
Right. And it was almost like she didn't want to give me the skill. It was almost like she was watching me, almost like I'm some sort of an experiment, and she's using her skills, but she's not giving me any.
I've heard this actually a lot. And I'm just curious if your situation was the norm of what I typically hear. What I hear a lot of times in this, and not to be making this about female sex or male sex, but I hear it seems like more often if people seek a marriage counselor or a doctor, a doctor of psychology that's doing counseling, where they'll ultimately recommend that you're incompatible. They recommend a divorce. And it seems like I see that that's more a trend when you have a woman counselor, where they might have a tendency to listen to the problems and focus on the problems and talk about the problems, because that's so fun talking about your problems. I know I went through 2 years of that myself, but where maybe they're projecting that on their past lives as women counselors, and seems like sometimes they maybe have a tendency, not even knowingly, to take your partner's or your wife's side and kind of like it's 2 against 1. Was that how it was in yours, or was it kind of different than that? I'm just curious.
No, that absolutely resonates with me. I think maybe it just comes from maybe a genuine need to want to help and advocate for the woman, which I understand and I totally respect. But right. We're getting off topic of trying to, give us the tools, try to mend this, not try to diagnose whether or not this even needs to be a thing, because that's not why I'm there.
That makes sense. So you hired her saying, I need help. And then it sounds like maybe that with good intentions, she projected onto your wife a victim. And instead of trying to coach you guys, which is what I do, on how to mend the marriage, it was more so how to help her get out of it instead of teaching you guys on how to make it work, right?
Right. And like I said, this took a whole year process. And ultimately, sadly, at the end of that, about a year later, I come home one day and, of course, she has all these ideas in her head. She has all these thoughts. And I come home and the kids are gone and she's packed up. And she's telling me that she's actually been talking to somebody else for a few months.
And this was a year after you guys stopped seeing the marriage.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So the marriage counselor or the doctor that was counseling you guys as a couple, maybe she planted the seed that you're not compatible, which may have ultimately led your wife to talk to somebody, right?
Well, definitely that. And then, of course, also the part, where I have to own myself, where, I was, I hate to use the term, I was mansplaining to her how she needed to feel and not, bringing her on this journey with me and really being more in a question of asking, what can I do? Where am I falling short?
So you didn't get the skills from the counselor,
no.
Doctor that should be trained to give you those skills on how to open up safe communication with your wife. So ultimately, now your wife didn't actually have an affair, but she was talking to somebody else. And that's, the affairs are common. And so we're just talking to somebody else. But typically when that happens, if the husband doesn't provide an emotionally, psychologically safe environment where the woman can actually say what's on her heart without fear of criticism, they will just by nature find that in somebody else. And it seems like, is that kind of maybe what happened a little bit in that scenario? That your wife was talking to somebody and you come home and she's gone, packed up, the kids were gone.
Absolutely. I really feel like instead of being able to train this Neanderthal here how to act properly, I was just basically being treated that was my nature and that was, and so sadly, instead of being able to open up and find out and probe properly with what she needs, I was just basically treated as an other by this program and by this other psychologist and ultimately by my wife.
Now, if I remember correctly, when you found yourself at home alone, if I remember correctly, you actually found a different marriage course that you tried also. And talk a little bit about that. Like, did you see any success from that, or ultimately, why did that not work or give you the results that you needed? And then you ultimately found Divorce Stoppers, our program. But kind of tell a little bit about what worked with that or what didn't.
Well, so obviously, with all these algorithms that are out there online, you're at home, you're on the internet, you're typing in all this stuff, asking about cheaters and rebounds and therapy. And of course, Google and everybody picks up on that. And all of a sudden you start getting all kinds of things in your social media feeds there's I can't even count how many programs I was offered.
For a program, right?
Right. Yeah. And so one of these actually found me. And so it was just one of the more, I guess, graphically appealing, because, everything's clickbait. But I went on there, and it was more of a Lone Ranger style program. Do it all yourself, take control of your own life. And the guy really did have a lot of good tips, much like yourself. He was another male, and he could really relate to me, which was nice. But the problem was that where it ended up failing for me was I got a whole bunch of good tips, but just like my previous attitude of being the Neanderthal, the bull that was going to come in here and fix my marriage, he really kind of empowered that aspect of it. But of course, when it comes to relationships, a lot of this is reciprocity. All these reciprocal ideas of give and take, opening myself up. This really wasn't that. This was take back your marriage. It was still very forceful. And of course, as you know, the honey works a lot better than vinegar to draw flies. And so whenever I'm over here trying to trying to appeal to my wife, I'm still coming across as this very aggro, very aggressive. And I got a lot of good tips, and I would use these tips. And I even got her to come back and talk to me about more than just the basic stuff in our lives. At the time, we had a rental business together, so there was some basic bookkeeping. We would talk about the kids, but she really wanted nothing more to do with me other than that. And so through this other program, I was able to rack up a couple of wins. But anytime I would mess up, since I'm not learning these actual tools of how to actually change myself, we basically end up back at step one.
I love that. This is a story that I think I almost hear for 100% of the clients that we run through the Divorce Stoppers program, where they've tried some stuff like, figured out things on their own even, or went on YouTube and got some information and got some different phrases you can try and some different talk charges or touch charges, which do give some good results. But it's always the same thing. Ultimately, my first marriage ended. I tried those same things. And there's programs out there that talk about, if she's talking to somebody else, eventually that'll fade. Well, it didn't. My ex-wife is married to that person that she was talking to. But I did employ some of those same tactics, like what you're talking about. I went through a program and I tried these different things, and I was seeing these little successes. But what would happen is when I would start like nudging her, like you, to the point that she would start talking to me, I had the same thing. So I fast forward, I get a divorce. I take some time off. I study marriage for like over a year because I did not want to mess up the next one. I didn't want to be in that position of paying myself. And I didn't want to hurt somebody else. And I didn't want my kids to have to go through something like that again. Because there's always more people involved, just the two that are married. There's the in-laws, the cousins, your children, your stepchildren, in my case, grandchildren. I have 5 grandchildren. And so there's so many people that it affects and hurts. And in my current marriage, so I started, I thought, man, I have studied marriage. I know what the heck I'm doing. My wife and I actually had started a marriage coaching business where we did a nonprofit coaching business through a church organization. And we were volunteering our time to do that. And we just never thought we would have any marriage problems. And then we ended up going through basically a terminal illness together, and it robbed our marriage, and resentment built up on both sides. She became my nurse for 2 years. There was all of the pillars of marriage were gone. Illness stole it from us. And my wife was a trooper. She took care of me like a king all the way through that, and even spoke for me because I lost my voice. I had stage 4 throat cancer. But on the other side of that, when the doctor said, "Hey, you're cancer free," we didn't have anything that we were fighting for together, and we started looking at each other, and there was just like resentment that built up, and it was really nobody's fault. It was just like happened. And excuse me, we did not know. It built up to the point that like we were arguing, and my problem, a lot of that in the second marriage was that I was on some medication that we didn't know it at the time, but the side effect of it was it caused anger, like rage. And I could tell that I had it, but I didn't associate it with the medicine. I associate it with, I had lost like 100 pounds. I wasn't the man that I used to be. I was a muscled up, like miniature gorilla, you know, going into that, like this manly man and helping people and loving everybody. And when I got on this medication, it made me like say some things that I would have never had said. Honestly, it made me have memory losses and I would forget it. I don't even remember some of it. But even though that wasn't necessarily my fault, it still caused her to resent some of the things that I said, even though I wasn't even in my right frame of mind. And her reactions to those things that I said caused her to be like short. Like she had never been short with me before. I was used to this woman that just treated me like I was, you know, God's gift to the earth. And when I started treating her poorly, she got a cold shoulder, and that made me resent her. And she was treating me back poorly because she resented how I was treating her. And I mean, ultimately, I told her I don't want to be in a marriage with you anymore. And she left, flew 2,000 miles away, and cold shouldered me. And then I realized what was causing like my anger, you know, after doing some research. And but she wouldn't even talk to me. Like it was just so rough. And then I realized I knew I didn't want the marriage to be like it was, because we had it so amazing that I wanted to get back to where it was before we had the resentment built up because of this illness. And well, I say because of the illness, that's a story I held on to. It was because of the way that I treated her and how she reacted to it and how I reacted to her actions. And we just couldn't find it. You know, when I told her I don't want to be in it anymore, she left and honored my request. And then here I am. I'm regretting it. I get off this medication. I return back to normal, where I don't want to kill people anymore. But the damage was done. We were both hurt and scarred. And even though my wife and I together had coached couples for years with to this day, 100% success on bringing couples back together that both wanted to work on their marriage, I didn't know how to do it myself. Like you said, you went on some Lone Ranger program and you saw some successes, but I was doing the same thing that you did. So I would do these things that would give me many wins, but she would test me to see if it was real. And I still had this resentment in my heart. And when she would test me, the old Denver would come back out for a second because that deep-seated resentment was there. And so when she would test to see if this new Denver was real, she would see the old Denver come back out, and I'd be back at square one. Like 6 weeks that it took me to get her to talk to me again. And we even had a little bit of sexting a little bit. That one little lash out of the old Denver, she was like, F it. I knew it was going to go back to this. And, you know, so I just sat down and said, like I am not going to go into marriage number 3 in the dating scene again and tell a new potential mate that I've already had 2 that failed. You're next. You know, I didn't want to be there. That would have humiliated me. And so, but I also knew that we had 100% success in helping people with their marriages. It can't be like this phenomenal feat to do this by myself. And so I just kind of like studied and studied and studied, and I tried some different things, and I journaled things that I tried that worked. And I created a new way of being for myself, and I wrote down the steps that I took to get there, and it worked. I found out everything that didn't work until I got to the point that everything that did work, and we got back together. And now we have our best marriage ever. And I launched a new program that actually helped men in that scenario, where if your wife is out the door and she's saying, you know, she's resistant, she doesn't even want to try again. I started teaching men what I did, because I had one marriage that failed. I knew what didn't work there. I knew how to work on the marriage when both people in the relationship were willing. And I had to learn, how do I make that happen, employing those principles with some tweaks on how do I do this by myself, so that and teach myself, which also empowered me to teach men, how do I have the many successes? That's a new way of being for me. So there never is that one time where she tests me and it takes it all back to ground zero, which is the perfect storm for another divorce. Like if people can't figure that out, it's always going to go ahead and end up in divorce, because all women, all wives on the face of the planet, women, if you've been in a long-term relationship, when they see even that you have changed in areas, they will test it. And if they see one little inkling of that old you in their mind, he hasn't changed at all. And you go back to ground zero and the divorce proceeds. And that's just the way that it goes. So I'm very thankful. Like every day, I thank God that I humbled myself enough to figure out what is the process to actually see myself through her eyes, and how do I become consistently the man that deserves her, number one, that doesn't feel guilty about deserving her, and that is a constant, steadfast, masculine man that is always the same, that makes her say, that is the safest guy on the planet. He is the 1% of the 1%. I'm not going to find this anywhere else. He's happy and he's consistently steady. He's never changing. And ultimately, figuring out the steps to take myself there, she ran back to me. And I teach the process of, yes, the end goal is to get your wife back, but we don't teach it. That's the end goal, really, is to change who you are, to become the most masculine, what I call a real man, that you are the 1% of the 1% of men. And any woman on the face of the planet can see that. And they would have to literally not be in their right mind to leave you. And it takes a minute to get there, even though we start out with some really, really fast steps, because I understand that when a woman's pissed off, that can forever change your whole life, even if the divorce does get stopped, if we don't help you take some immediate action. Because when you have a divorce attorney involved, then that can actually impact your finances forever, even if the divorce gets stopped, because of people making stupid decisions, giving stuff away, or, whatever, when they're mad. And I understand that. So that's why the program employs some tactics immediately to address some of those issues. By the way, no other program addresses those immediate things with the understanding of you have assets together. There's some other programs out there that are available that I looked at where they just focus on the relationship, and nobody has the mindset of, well, in addition to your marriage, there's also businesses that are owned together. There's checking accounts, there's assets, there's savings account, and there's schools for the children. Is she going to go enroll them in a different school and forever mess all of that up? Is she signing a 12-month lease somewhere, which if y'all decide to get back together, now she's under a new lease or a mortgage. And so maybe you guys can't afford that. So she had to go get a job, or she's looking at getting a job to pay the lease until the divorce is final. And like, those are real things. And no other program addresses any of that, or the urgency of, we need to do some things now that may not even be real. And I don't teach the program. The modules are not about fake it till you make it. But for the first week, some of this stuff, it's not going to be real until you practice it. So some of the stuff, the first week of the program, we employ some of those things that are a little bit fake it till you make it, because it's not going to be genuine in your heart until you've been immersed in it for several weeks. Like, it's a new way of being. But I do understand the sense of urgency. Like, there is some people out there that will help in similar solutions, but they don't hit on those things. They don't realize or even teach or take into account that she's about to sign a lease, or she's already signed a lease, and now she's going to have to get a job, and the kids are out of school. And they really can't even relate to it. Like, I know the only other folks out there that are teaching stuff like this, it's a guy, and, he's brought in a family member. She hasn't been through these type of problems. She hasn't been divorced. She hasn't been faced with a separation where the spouse doesn't want to come back. And neither has he in the same program. Like, he was the one that left 15 years ago, and now he's talking about that. But he doesn't know what it's like to be left. He doesn't know how you feel, because he's never felt that way. There's another program out there where there's this kid teaching it, and he's never even been married. So he doesn't understand the concept of, what if I have kids together and she needs to get a new mortgage and we have business, a checking account together and all this stuff. He can't even focus on teaching that in the program or addressing that to help men because he's never experienced it. And that's one of the things where I feel like every client that I take on, because of my age, and I'm now a grandfather of 5, I can relate to all of that because I personally have been through it. I have been where all of my clients, I understand what it's like to be the cheater. I understand what it's like to be cheated on. I understand what it's like for the wife to leave. And ultimately, I try all this stuff, and it actually ends up in going down in divorce because the things that I would revert back to, it didn't work. All the wins, even changing who I was as a person, it didn't work because nobody taught me how to show that to her. And that didn't work in the first marriage. And in the second marriage, luckily I had studied marriage enough, and I had a wife that had a heart to help marriages as well. But then we had a tragedy, and she was out, and I had to figure out what can I do to actually make her want to come back. So all of those scenarios, I understand and can relate to my clients. And that's why I also, in addition to the modules where we immerse you in this, so it's a way of being, so you don't have to memorize, phrases 1, 2, and 3. It changes how you think. So you just walk in the way that you react with her in a way that it becomes actually natural, real, and a lifelong change. But because of these unique situations that we're talking about with divorces and these long-term relationships and the financial stuff that goes with it and the stuff that can forever alter the course, even if you do stay married, if these changes keep moving in that direction for too long, that's one of the reasons that I do and have availability on my calendar for my clients, where if there's something that you're going through where you need a question answered right now, and you can't wait for that to come up in the module, like maybe that's in week 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, that I allow my clients to actually schedule one-on-one calls with me. And I feel like that's kind of unique to the course offerings and the teachings that I go through. And I know that you've actually took advantage of that a couple of times yourself. Was that different than other things that you had tried that didn't work for you?
Absolutely. Being able to get that one-on-one time, and then also being able to actually jump in and have other people, the other men in the program, being able to actually log in and watch what we were talking about in case they maybe had those questions in their own head. And that honestly just maximizes time because it's almost like group therapy and one-on-one therapy. So if I forgot a question, someone else could jump in and they could ask it, or, before I even had a chance to ask it or learn it from you. And one of the other guys brings it up. And it definitely helped me break that cycle of resentment and immediately set up a safe space to be able to, start tweaking and changing how I am and what I'm putting out there to her.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I know earlier on our call, we were talking about your therapist, like the doctor that you guys were seeing that recommended. But one of the things I want to point out too, like on the one-on-one calls that I do with you guys, or even as we're going through the modules and like teaching the steps of success to get you from 0 to hero, is we call it coaching, because as you remember, we're always focused on you going from 0 to hero. So we start out by saying the problem is you're at 0, but we're focused on the solution, which is getting you to hero. And so that's why it's a coaching program. I never have claimed, nor do I ever want to claim to be a therapist, because I've seen those therapists just like you have. And therapists always want to talk about your problems. And this course, and at my very core, I am very solution oriented, because it's nice to address what the problems are. But what we really want to think about is we're keeping our eye on the prize, and that's the solution, which everybody is attracted to the program because their solution is you want your wife back. But we kind of pivot on, if you want your wife back, the solution to that is, let's set your eye on the new prize. Let's make you a different man. And the man that forever alters and changes. I stand for something called legacy and connection. That's my stand in my life for this season. And I know that when I help a client, like when I've helped you, you have children and you have a stepdaughter, that in helping you save your relationship, you are now leaving a legacy of marriage that works to your children, instead of continuing to leave a legacy of brokenness, heartache, and divorce to your children. And so I just think that's very encouraging to children also. I don't know what the guidelines are on social media or email marketing when I share these testimonials with people on allowing children, but I've actually had from so many of my clients talk about their children's lives are changed because it's so encouraging to the children to see mom and dad or mom and stepdad, even if you messed up your first divorce, to actually see it work in a second one, knowing that there was problems. And then, do you know how many adult people are in therapy today about they have made an inner vow to themselves that they'll never get married because they saw mom go through 3 marriages that failed, and they're in therapy over that. And their therapy could have just been fixed if mom would have got with a coach that taught her a new way of being so she would stop making those same mistakes. You know, people that have been in 6 marriages, and if anybody's watching this testimonial and you've been in a 6th marriage, hey, we're going to make it so this 6th one is your last. Like, you're going to get to stay in it, right? That's our goal. There's other coaching programs out there that actually want to brag that they have 70% success. And that's not our goal, as you know here. Our goal is 100% success with every man that comes in the program. And that's why we allow you, after you go through the 7 weeks, almost every single person has opted to continue going another 7 weeks, another 7 weeks, another 7 weeks, because you're doing that, right? You keep seeing successes. Like, why did you continue the optional option? Why did you continue, take advantage of the option to continue it again past the 7 weeks? Like, what was in that for you to continue it? Because your wife came back
week 3.
Week 3. So
yeah.
What made you continue past 7? Because you got what you wanted, you got your wife back. Why did you keep going past week 7?
Well, you see, it's a lot more than just finding the holes in your game, which any therapy that is, I mean, it's a wonderful thing to experience. Sure. But then you need that mentoring piece too. It's almost church-like to keep you on a path. And, and like any path, you can always deviate off. And so right now at this point, I'm actually 30 weeks in because for one, the value of what we're talking about is absolutely worth that constant mentoring and that guidance and that group. So that way it's not just me failing or me meandering off that path, but I have you and I have the other guys to kind of help, guide that for me. So really, in a way, it's almost like a men's group as well as the actual marital finding a hole in your game piece.
Yeah. So that sense of community, I actually partake in that as well with our community. Like, I enjoy seeing the engagements between all of you guys in our men's group that we have. And I actually enjoy being involved in that community as well, and sharing my losses in the past and how I turned those into wins. But it's so encouraging to me to see that you guys get so encouraged in the community that we've ultimately built here. And that's one of the things too that I felt like is a huge value to the program. Even if somebody says, okay, I'm at the end of 7 weeks, I got my wife back, I don't need to continue in the community anymore in the program, but we still allow men to stay in the actual community of collaborating with other men to see the wins and stuff like that, because that's part of the program. But we give that engagement in the community. I know your wife was supposed to be on this phone call and that she had something and came up where she's not able to make that. But I wanted to share her testimonial a little bit from some of the things that she's told you that she's noticed, which is one of the things I think that encouraged you to continue going through the program over and over, because of the changes that she keeps seeing, like the many successes that you keep having in your life and in your marriage. What are some of the things, like if she were to have joined the call today, that she would have said, because that she has shared these things with you about what she sees in you and ultimately in your marriage, what it's done? Can you share some of the things that she shared with you since she wasn't able to make it today?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, one thing, like you had mentioned, the interplay between us and how we act together and how we mesh has been so fundamentally changed. And she really sees in me more now of a actual partner, that I am listening. I've always loved her. I've always listened. I've always been there for her, but by my standards, not actually understanding where she's coming from. I've really picked up the ability to really empathize with her. And it's actually even at the point now, even whenever we do have disagreements or fights, like all couples are always going to, as long as you're a sane person,
Right.
that these fights actually come from a place of love. So it's almost like you're fighting out of a place of love. So it although it's challenging, she even almost gets a little bit of enjoyment out of it, just compared to where we used to be. Because used to the fights would be vitriolic, they'd be very very confrontational.
Yeah.
But now it actually feels like we're trying to come to an agreement, a place together. And so I would say probably just the biggest thing is learning how to disagree or fight with love.
So you're saying that your disagreements have become fun for her because they're now creating a productive environment of understanding each other, right?
It's just a challenge now, yeah, and instead of this insurmountable, fight.
Have you seen, since she sees that new way of being, that she brings more disagreements to you now because she feels safe in telling her thought or her opinion because she's not worried how you're going to react to it?
Absolutely. Disagreeing is not a negative. Disagreeing is a positive. Disagreeing is how you develop and move forward and get better.
I think you had said that she said that you're now that she feels like you're her soulmate now and that you guys have become best friends, right?
She's always been my soulmate, but now she sees it too, and she sees that in me. Yeah.
Okay, I got you. So now you're both in agreement with the soulmates, and she's feeling.
Yes. Yes.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Okay. Well, listen, David, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with other men out there that are going through like what you also have been through, and giving them hope, because there's so many men that's been in our shoes that's walked before us that actually their marriages ended because they were just hopeless because of what their wife was telling them. And their wife was telling them the truth. There's no hope. I want out. You're not changing my mind. And they were telling the truth, but we've both heard those same things and we didn't listen to it, because I always like to say that Instagram will always tell you if you love her, let her go. But if you let her go, not only are you in a failed marriage or another failed marriage, so is she. And if she can learn to be a productive spouse in the current marriage that she's in by following your lead, to me, that's what a real man is. And if I love my wife, I'm not going to let her go. If I love her, I'm going to show up and I'm going to show out, and I'm going to give her the safest place on the face of the earth to be, where I am the husband that is the husband of her dreams, of the 1% of the 1%. And I'm going to spend every day the rest of my life in that way of being of that man. And even when I have a minute, she's not going to know I'm having a minute in the way how I emotionally respond to her, because it's a new way of being who I am now, where I am not emotionally reactive in a way that's going to harm her psychologically or make her feel that it's unsafe to tell me she has a disagreement. Of course, the reason God put us together is because she's the opposite of me. So even though we like the same foods, you may not like the same foods. It depends on your marriage, but you're not supposed to be the same. You're supposed to be two different people that contribute equally in different ways and in different roles. And it's figuring out how do those roles work for you so that it's a safe environment where you can actually both feel like you're soulmates and one person doesn't feel lorded over or like their opinion is not valued. And so many marriages struggle with the wife really cares what he wants and she really cares what he wants, but the relationship turns into critical. Facebook would call it toxic, but I love it when I take on a client that has a toxic relationship, because those are the funnest to fix. Those are the biggest success stories when there is no hope, and you can kind of let go of that psychological thinking that you're defeated already and realize that it's actually easy. It's easy. People kind of get, I don't know, like they don't understand it when I say that this is easy. Like when we're hurting and there's something that we want that we can't have, we want to psychologically take the hard road because, and we've been ingrained to feel like, well, anything that's worth anything is worth fighting for. Like, and fighting implies that there's hard work involved. This is not hard work. It's easy. Like, this is the easiest journey I've ever helped people take that I took myself. It's the easiest thing I've ever done. When I went through this and did this myself, it was literally the easiest thing I ever did because it's just step 1, step 2, step 3, and I transitioned into thinking differently. And it was just almost like a miracle before my eyes as I saw it worked. And I started having so much happiness and peace in my inner being because I just knew that it was going to give me a new life, that I had really never had that before because I was in a new way of being. And that eventually my wife, like your wife, saw that. And because I loved her enough to figure this out and to become a different person. I remember before I was critical of her because I loved her and I wanted her to have a better life. So I criticized her areas that needed improvement. And now in fixing my own areas and fixing how I respond and talk to her and even how I think, she follows my lead in that area because she sees how happy I am. And she actually understands that the new me doesn't need her to be happy for me to be happy. So she doesn't feel responsible for my happiness anymore. She actually told me today, she's like, I just love that we can talk and navigate through problems and even have a disagreement. And we are still so connected. And you know what? I actually said, you know what? I do too. I love that our emotion of love is no longer tied to, do we agree? And are you going to have it my way or the highway? Like, cause we don't even think like that anymore. And it wasn't because I was a bad person when I did think like that. It was because I didn't understand how else to think. Cause that's how my dad thought. And that's how my dad still thinks. He needs to go through my freaking program and he's not even facing a divorce. But he would have such a happier marriage if he did go through it. So anyway, anything else in closing? I mean, I thank you for your time. Any last thoughts that come to mind that you want to share with anybody that might be watching this?
Well, really, one thing that, just kind of pick up on something that you hit on, it's really more about having a gut check for yourself instead of trying to imprint on them how they need to be.
I love that so much. And would you say that taking steps over the course of 7 weeks, because it is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Like you start out and you're distant from your wife, you're way up on the hill and she's down living the good life by the river. And your goal is to go drink that water with her. Would you say that it's very important though, for anybody that's looking at joining our program, that they don't skip any of the steps? Because I know some people try that, and I know that you tried skipping a couple of steps because you're wanting to get faster than the 3 weeks that it happened for you. And then what happened when you skipped a step, right?
You got to repeat the step and then back up. Three forward, 2 backward, sometimes. And
it's so easy. You just have to patiently take them though, right? It's easy. Would you agree that the program is easy?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole point is to make yourself better. Don't make it easier. You just make yourself better.
Would you also agree, though, in closing, somebody said this to me today, that even though it is easy, it's you doing things that are the exact opposite of how you feel, of what you feel like you should be doing, and that it is the exact opposite a lot of times of even common sense. Because when it comes to the heart, what our brain thinks is going to work, it's usually almost always the opposite thing that works. And people are too close to their situation to see it. That's the only reason that I have a business, that I do this, because if you weren't so close to your own situation that you could actually back up and actually see what would work, nobody would ever need me, and the world would even be a better place without somebody like me. And that would actually, I would be happy about that, because I can go do another business. But I love the distance that I have with people to see their situation. And I know when you come on board, you really thought your situation, there was a lot of private details we didn't share, but you thought your situation was so unique. And then as you go through the program, you found out, oh, this is not unique at all. There's so many people dealing with like
it's just relationships,
same issues, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human, and these are all just human relationships.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, I know one thing that is unique to some people, and then we'll close here, is if you have biological children with your wife, or even if you don't, but if you also have a stepchild, a lot of times when that stepchild sees that you hurt mama, they're going to be like your arch enemy too. And I know that I loved hearing you talk about that was an issue for you. Like, it was an obstacle. Even when your wife wanted to come back, the stepkids were now living a new life because she had moved out and they were doing their own thing. And even though she was ready to come back, they weren't having it. And I loved how you shared on our last, like, I don't remember if that was in the social media group or whatever, how you shared, like, you just stayed consistent with the program, and eventually they got more on board with you than they ever were, like, since the beginning of the marriage, right?
Well, once I changed. So, that change stayed in me, and just have to stay on the course. But yeah, I'm a different guy.
I want to give you an additional gift in addition to this free content. I want to offer you step 1 to begin the process of saving your marriage and getting your wife back, restoring your family with your lady. I want you to go to denvergriffin.com and register for my free masterclass. At the end of that free masterclass, just for a special thank you for attending that, I'm going to offer you a special discounted rate for an opportunity to work with me. If you need the additional help, time is of the essence in many cases. Go to denvergriffin.com today. That's DenverGriffin.com.